So, hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us on the Next Online podcast. We're very excited to have you on as our next guest. Now, before we get into all things marketing, I want you to take us back to the beginning of your career, kind of introduce yourself to the audience too a little bit, and take us down that journey.
Yeah, it's so good to be here. Thank you for having me. So, my career began about 15 years ago, and I had graduated from university with a history degree. And I wasn't quite sure what you're supposed to do with a history degree. All I knew was that I had one. And I had to figure it out. So I kind of figured I liked helping people, and I figured that a lot of us spend more time at work than we spend with our own families. And so I wanted to make the workplace a better place. And so I did a postgraduate certificate in HR. And then I got my first role at PwC in financial reporting. So I also didn't use that.
Wow.
And then eventually went over to KPMG, where I was working in HR, and Canadian Tire as well. And then I got recruited to come work at BrandActive, where I work now. It was a smaller organization, but there was a really big opportunity for them to advance some of their HR practices that would make an immediate business impact. And I didn't necessarily know a lot about the areas that they needed help in, but it sounded really interesting and a really great way to see the impact of what you were doing. I found in a bigger organization, it was so helpful because you could really become a true expert in something. But at times it was really hard to kind of see a finished product because it went through so many changing of hands. And so I joined BrandActive. I was really nervous to go to a company where people wouldn't necessarily recognize the name on my resume anymore. And I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I really leaned into expertise of not knowing and asking and getting a lot of opinions and reading a lot and trying to learn as much as I could. And by doing that, I ended up turning into kind of sort of our CEO's almost like chief of staff. And I led our IT for a while, not from a technical point of view, more from like a budget governance. Do we have the right people in the right roles? Do we have the right tools? That kind of thing. And then I got into our organizational strategy and operations, and now I lead our growth functions. So in business development and marketing. It's definitely been a journey, but a lot of learning as you go and a lot of not being afraid to just figure it out.
Absolutely. And what a journey, honestly, from seeing the different specializations that you've had throughout your career and now landing here at BrandActive for quite some time now. What kind of gave you that confidence to keep trying, the new things instead of sticking to that same safe path that typically happens with human nature, right?
Yeah, it can be really comforting to stay with what you know.
Yeah.
It's a really good question. I think that when faced with a challenge, I think the first thing, the way I try to think of it is let's start with really understanding what the problem is that's in front of us. And I think when we can kind of feel really comfortable to drop any preconceived notions we have about the problem, we can also drop any preconceived notions about what we're supposed to know about how to solve. I've found it really helpful to use frameworks or I'm going to call it like skills that you can use in one role that take you to the next role. So for example, when I was overseeing recruitment at BrandActive, one of the things that was really hard was similar to my decision to join BrandActive. It was, how do you get people to be comfortable to leave a large organization? We recruit a lot from like Deloitte, KPMG, that kind of thing, to come to a smaller organization. And so we really built our recruiting framework around almost like a sales framework. We talked about it. It was really hard to get people in 2021 to accept job offers as well. It was a very competitive market. And one of the things I started doing was talking about our culture on LinkedIn. And it was almost immediate that we started to see like a higher acceptance rate for our offers because people knew what it was like to be on the inside. Everyone's always nervous to start a new job. You don't know what people are like. They're putting their best foot forward in the interview.
Yeah.
And so when I started on the growth team, the first thing I did was start posting about the value that we have as a way to start to build my network and get our voice out there. And so I think by kind of leaning into what you do know and being comfortable to learn new things, seek out experts in the space, you know more than you think, and you're often more capable than you think you are to be able to solve a new problem if you can kind of try to see something in a new light.
And I like that point of view. I know that, like you mentioned a little bit before in this question, like people like being comfortable, but throughout our conversations and something that I also stand by is like being uncomfortable is such a huge part of that growth as well. And a part of the journey, honestly, when you're navigating that professional career. So why do you think leaning into this discomfort is so important for both the personal and professional development side?
That's a great question. I think that often when we think about our professional identities, we really get tied into wanting to be successful, wanting to get to the next level, really seeing who we are as what we do. And I think that when you're tied to that, that's when it gets harder to try new things because you're almost wrapping up failure and failure as a person. When in fact, like all of us are so much more than what we do every day. And getting tied into that identity almost like limits you from risk taking, both personally and professionally, because you kind of see yourself like if I had seen myself as an HR person, I never would have taken that role at PwC in
Yeah.
financial reporting. But I use so much of the skills today that I learned in that. I think I was there for about 2 years that I would never have gotten had I just wanted to only work in an HR environment. In the beginning, I was kind of just open to learning whatever it could be and not really seeing it as something that I was tied to or that's not for me. Just really being open to, am I interested in the problem? Do I think I could offer something to the problem? And like, what do I need to do to be able to get there? And I think when we really open ourselves up to, we are more than kind of what we see ourselves at work, it also allows us to approach failure, use failure lightly. I don't think there's actual failures. There's just kind of learnings on the way. Even if you
Yeah.
do something wrong or mess something up, it's not really a failure unless you didn't learn anything at all. But I think when we kind of detach from that one singular identity, it becomes less of a blow because you can change identities and kind of who you are and what you do on a day-to-day basis almost. It's not really just one thing for an extended period of time.
Absolutely. And I think that, typically when people see failure, they think like it's alarming, but I like how you kind of phrase that and reframe the mindset there. It's almost like, they're learnings, like you said, like every single, I guess, hard point in your career is that stepping stone to get to that next step or that next level or whatever it may be, depending on the person's goal.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, if you look back, a lot of the times where you thought you might have, quote, failed, often it worked out. It didn't necessarily stay as something that was a huge failure. Even if it was losing a job or something like that, it's brought you to kind of where you are today and you learned something as part of the process and it gave you a new opportunity to do it differently. And you have to try and fail in order to learn. If you're not failing, you're not fully learning.
Exactly. And I also think that kind of goes into our next point here, where, people tend to kind of have this 5 or 10 year plan, this structure in their mind, this linear path. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. But I feel like you've kind of challenged that idea based off of your core beliefs here that you're mentioning. So, why do you think transferable skills matter more than those rigid long term plans?
Yeah, I've always been a big believer in almost like designing a life that you want in 5 to 10 years versus like a specific job or something like that. I think when you get so focused on what's the job I want to be in 5 years or something materialistic, it closes you off to other opportunities that could be presenting themselves to you, which are often what you need in the moment. And so when I thought about 5 years ago, kind of the life that I wanted, I envisioned like being able to be present with my family, being able to be in nature, feeling challenged. It was more of a feeling plan and a outlook plan, I guess, than any sort of like rigid, like I want to be great at public speaking or
Yeah.
I want to be great at writing executive reports and I want an executive job title. It was really about what would those things allow me to have. And then you can see how things can kind of fall into place. And there can be many ways to get to a more present lifestyle or a lifestyle that allows you to, like, I live near the ocean and near the mountains. I moved from the city maybe 3 years ago. And part of what allowed me to do that was a remote role. But there are other ways I could have gotten to being able to do that. And so by focusing on it more of how do I want to feel and what do I want my life to be like, you can kind of also see a lot of scenarios that your life could go to be able to get you to the lifestyle that you envision for yourself.
I like that. I love that point that you mentioned. Like you're planning your life, not necessarily, let's say, the role or that specific goal within your professional career around your life. It's the other way around. And I like how you mentioned, like, you can find different things here to kind of plan your life, around the goals that you may have. And I know through our conversations, you mentioned nature, spending more time outside, but yoga has also been a big part of your life. And I know when we chatted like over 20 years, right?
Yeah.
So, how has practicing this non-attachment influenced the way you lead and make career decisions? Because I know that's very transferable. I'm also a yogi myself, so I get it.
Yeah, totally. And I think when I started going to yoga, I was just doing the motions. I was going through the class. I was very flexible, great at arm balances. And over the years, I started listening more to what the teachers were actually saying. And I eventually did my teacher training and I learned so much. And I eventually went to India with some of the teachers that taught me over the years. And it really reframed how I saw yoga and how I actually saw my life. A lot of people don't know, but there's actually 8 limbs of yoga, of which only one is the actual movement. And one of the limbs that I like the most talks about non-attachment. And I think that part of that is about your identity. And for me, the other part of it is like non-attachment to an outcome. I think sometimes when we do our work or work with other people or create some sort of something, we have a vision for how it's going to be. How are
Yeah.
people going to react? What is going to happen next? All of those things. But what non-attachment has taught me is that I have to let go of all of those and it'll be what it'll be. And I think that that has really helped me with being more exploratory in how I approach my work, having a little bit more fun with it too, and treating it more of like a joyful exploration rather than a very serious research or analysis. You bring in the rigor after, but when you kind of approach it with a bit more lightness, you're able to see a little bit more. And you also allow yourself to see other options. I think sometimes we focus a lot on like, oh, there's one way to do something, but there's a myriad of different ways that you could do something. I also think that non-attachment helps with interpersonal skills, which like kind of in turn helps you in your career and personally. When you expect something very specific from people and you don't get it, there can cause a friction. But when you
Yeah.
open yourself up to this new reality of people are going to react how they're going to react, and it allows you to stay more curious. And when you can stay more curious, you can learn something from every single person that comes through your life. Even if you don't agree with their point of view, they have something to offer you. And if you choose to not listen to it, like it really is your loss. But when you look at like a non-attachment style, you can really open yourself up to different points of view. It also kind of helps you because you become someone who learns a lot very quickly and you're also easier to work with, right?
Yeah.
I find sometimes the work that we do at BrandActive, we work with a lot of different departments and organizations, and it can sometimes feel like if you're in marketing and you're talking to someone in IT, you're almost speaking a different language. But when you kind of let go of what you need out of that conversation and just lean into what is this person actually saying, you can often get to a better result, even if it's someone you're not exactly used to working with.
Absolutely. And I like that shift in the mindset there. I think it really, really helps with also the point of like the reactions, like you're saying, like you expect something from someone and maybe you don't get that and it causes that friction. It's almost like you can only control the things that you can control.
Yeah.
And you can control the way you kind of, you know, present yourself at the situation or whatever it is. And I think that that specific style really, really helps with that. I've felt it in my own practice and applied it to my journey as well. So I get that on that level.
Definitely. I like what you said about controlling what you can control. I think that also leans into like the ability to try new things is you can look at variables and what are the ones that you can tinker with or play
Yeah.
with or see what's happening. But there are going to be things, especially when you're trying new things that are beyond your control. And so being able to identify those can really help you to see where does my role fit in. A lot of the career shifts that I've had has been a result of me seeing an opportunity and seeing where I could contribute and just kind of going for it. And I think that that can be frustrating if you're not looking at the pieces that aren't within your control.
Yeah.
And I think it's also a respectful thing for other people too, to be able, you need to see where the actual gap is and what you can contribute.
Absolutely. And now, you know, I kind of want to talk about also, you mentioned that nothing feels better than being a beginner. So, how has, you know, allowing yourself to start from scratch helped you stay curious, innovative, and open to new perspectives, especially in the new light with this type of style that you've implemented and things like that?
Yeah, I think like one of the things that I enjoy is being a beginner. I think when you get a few years into your career, sometimes it's comfortable to not be a beginner because you're like, well, I know what I'm doing and it feels good
Yeah.
to be an expert. I really love being a beginner because it lets me see problems with fresh eyes. I think we've all been in that situation where you're working at something really hard, you bring in a fresh person and they say it so simply and they just see the solution in front of you, but you've all been looking at it too long. to really see it.
Very true.
And when you're a beginner, you don't feel beholden to like any sort of rule or framework that you should know to be approaching a solution. You're really just looking for opportunities and where you can help. Like when I stepped into this role, a big part of which is business development, and we were looking at our sales process. And I think when you're a veteran in terms of like how long you've been at a certain specialty, you know like the rules of the trade of like, well, we don't say this here, we don't say that here. But when we were building out what does our sales process look like, I thought of it as, okay, I don't know a ton about sales processes, but I have been the buyer in a ton of sales processes. And I know how it feels to go through that process. And so I need help. I need to bring in an outside vendor to be able to help me with that and talk to people who have been in the role. But what I can contribute is the empathy side of it, of like, how would I feel if I was the VP at a large company and then I was talking to a vendor and then they all of a sudden messaged my manager? I would not like that.
Yeah.
That's a very standard tactic that people will employ. But looking at it from that lens allowed me to kind of look at it as well, let's just bring it back to the basics versus kind of looking at something of like, well, this is how it should be exactly. It also allows you to like translate more into your business or whatever it is that you're supporting to be able to do that, because you're not looking at it as a blanket statement, but you're actually taking considerations that are specific to what it is you're doing and able to integrate them.
Absolutely. And now, kind of shifting that into our next point, like trying new things also brings that fresh energy as well. When it ties perfectly when you start as a beginner, too, and ideas into spaces that feel stuck at times. So, how do you think this vulnerability and experimentation lead to better leadership and creativity?
Yeah, I think that when you can encourage people that you work with to experiment and try new things, like you have to make it safe enough for them to be able to do so. I host a marketers networking group. And the last one I hosted, I invited someone I know really well. Her name is Nancy. She works at Noetic Consultants, and she had such a good idea. So I'm going to borrow it here. But it was she doesn't work at, she's the founder of Noetic Consultants. But she suggests that you start with the worst idea first. And you start with what happens if we don't do anything. And I really liked that because I think when you can say, hey, like it's okay to say a bad idea, let's all get our bad ideas out, it makes a massive difference. I always joke that last year I feel like I just said every bad idea that like came to my head. But it was a time of we were really building a new function, a new way of doing things. And so we needed to start somewhere. And by starting with what was a bad idea, it allowed other people to start to contribute. And then we could build something together that got the best of the team. And so I think that like this whole starting with like the beginner and how do you create more experimentation on the team is like someone has to go first and someone has to, and it all depends on how that person treat it, like bonus points if that person's the leader because people will follow suit.
Yeah.
But if you can kind of put something out there in the beginning that really showcases psychological safety for people, you really allow for some different types of thinking.
Absolutely. And you're like creating like this safe space for people to not be afraid to kind of speak up about those bad ideas that you're kind of describing, so that, when you're brainstorming, let's say a new function, new idea, a new creative process, my marketing brain is like, I
Yeah.
get this fully because I'm like, if you get all those out the way, it could lead to something actually really, really good. Maybe it's a combination of all that turn into something that's even bigger than what you thought.
Yeah, we all have ideas that are like half formed in our brain.
Yes.
And I think too, when you're creating something that you're going to bring to a broader public, you need more than one person to be able to get those ideas together because we all have different values and experiences and beliefs. And what you think is great may really alienate
Yeah.
another segment. And when you can bring more voices in, you can get more diverse perspectives. And it really helps with the brainstorm and to be able to finalize. I remember doing a communications project, and what we did is we actually brought someone from every department and different demographics across the entire organization. And we did it as working groups so that people could kind of say, here's what's important to me, here's what I want to hear about. And it really made a big difference in terms of like making sure that we were thinking about what types of information people wanted to hear, how they wanted to interact with their leaders. I think this is getting better, but I think a lot of organizations feel like they need to really be buttoned up all the time and business news. But a lot of the time people actually want to like lower the waterline a bit and get to know their leadership. And that can really help with psychological safety as well. So it can make a big difference.
I completely agree. I think that, especially what you said, like getting the different perspectives from across the board, not just leadership too, can really play into, at the end of the day, those decisions that need to be made. Because, like you said, everyone has their own POV, different background, different ideas. So it's kind of like, let's just all come together and make something real good.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And like I think one of the things that I also remember is ask for help, right? Like people want to be included and they want to help other people. I think sometimes it can be scary, like if you don't know something about a topic, to reach out to someone who does, especially if you don't know them. I have done
Yeah.
that probably dozens of times now, and no one's actually said no. I do try and like be very specific in what I need. I try to be very respectful of the person's time.
Yeah.
It usually people are pretty open to having like exploratory conversations of like, could this be something interesting? And it's a lot of fun, and you get to know different types of people, and you never know when people are going to be able to help you or you to help them.
Exactly. Exactly. I love it. And I know earlier on you touched upon how you started posting on LinkedIn, right? And that it could play a huge role into sales as a tool for connection and networking. Now, what's your advice for using LinkedIn intentionally to really build those relationships and open up those doors that we might not even see?
Yeah. So one of my favorite creators around LinkedIn is Darren McKee. He has taught me so much. We brought him in to help us with our entire organizational LinkedIn. And one of the things he talks about initially is make sure you know why you're doing it. And often you need to go deeper than the first why. So your first answer might be like, well, I want to like sell more services to these people. Well, like, why do you want to do that?
Yeah.
He actually suggests like a 6 layer why. And a lot of the times you get something a lot more deep and personal to you. Like I had mentioned with my 5 year plan that I wanted to be more in nature, and having a really strong network allows me to do that because I can work more remotely than if I was always in an office in one specific location. It opened up more of a global network to me. But so that was like the first thing I would say. I also think that you also want to think about, for me, part of the reason like I like being on LinkedIn is there's a connection point of it. And so there's going to be times where you might be sharing more and sharing more personally. A lot of people, especially now with AI and technology, there's less authenticity out in the world. And I think a lot of people are on social media using AI to write things, and that doesn't offer the same level of connection. And so part of my why is around connection and making solid relationships. And so I make a really strong point to only use AI for editing and to reflect on something more personally, both in my posts as well as the comments I leave people. They should be something that, for the most part, like I uniquely can offer. And I think that that intentionality can be game changing when it comes to like what you're reading, who you're engaging with, and if you were in the same city, would you meet up for coffee kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
that is like a good differentiator.
I like that because typically, like you said, like right now, I feel like social in general is very oversaturated with a lot of that type of content. But you're really able to tell the difference when someone is like, okay, they used AI or tools for editing, but they really put that human thought that's in your mind to be able to have that connection. Because I think that's something that is still so important today, especially for the next generation to know, like coming into the workforce or whether they're listening in, they're already in the workforce, like how can I improve those connections with people? It's even starting on posting. And I like what you said, being intentional with the comments.
The comments make all the difference. Like when I first started posting on LinkedIn, I mentioned it was because of trying to get our company culture out there, and
Yeah.
it went well. But when I really got into leaving comments and how do I find people who are interested in the same topics as me, that's I think when it really made an even bigger impact. And it's been like I've been posting again for like the last year, maybe year and a half, like a couple times a week. And my network has more than doubled in that time. And
Wow.
I think I'm over 500,000 organic impressions on the post, which is like
Wow.
awesome. It's a great way for people to find me. Like if I don't want a new opportunity, but if I did, it's a great way for people to find me. I think you and I got connected that way.
Yes.
And then even for our business development and marketing, honestly, even just connecting people, like one of my favorite parts of my role is like at BrandActive, we worked with about like 40% of the Fortune 100. We have an amazing client list, and a lot of them are working at companies that do acquisitions, they're senior brand leaders, and what they're going through is stressful. Like it's rebranding is a once in an every 10-year endeavor. And so being able to connect those people, to be able to share their problems, share lessons, and have a peer-to-peer conversation can be really beneficial. And so LinkedIn has really allowed us to do that in a more effective way for our clients and people in our network, to help them meet people who are similar to them, that have similar problems, and network in a different way.
Absolutely. And I think it, like, to that point, it goes well beyond just like how it used to be, like the announcements and, I'm so excited to share this. It's more about even learning about the person. Like you said, like you put your culture out there on LinkedIn, and that's how people were able to kind of feel it before even being there.
Yeah.
So same thing when it comes to like peer to peer, like you get to know someone through their posts. And like you mentioned, that's kind of how we got connected. I saw a lot of your posts, your intentional, thoughtful comments as well on other people's posts. And I was like, perfect guest. So it works. It truly does.
Yeah, it really does. And it can help you in so many different areas of your professional life. But I think the best part of it all is like the people that I've met. They've been really like inspiring people, and people that I now call my friends, that I've met like through, I travel for work. I go to a lot of conferences. I'm meeting up with people in real life, and they're great. They're inspiring. They're smart. They're funny. And
Yeah.
that's been like kind of the best part of all of it, which has been great.
That's amazing. And now, as we get into our last question here, it's more towards the next generation. So, for younger professionals who want to grow into leadership roles, what advice would you give them about saying yes to new opportunities, even when it feels like it's a little bit outside that comfort zone?
Yeah, I would say, like, without sounding cheesy, like, believe in yourself and bet on yourself. Like, you are so much more capable than you think that you are. And nothing great has ever happened from staying within your comfort zone. And so I think that by like leaning on what you already know and your own like intuition and wisdom, I guess, can be really helpful. And you have the ability to learn. Like if you look back on kind of what you've accomplished so far, even if it's more in your personal life or your student life, you figured things out.
Yeah.
And there's lots of areas available to help you. Like information is so easily accessible now that you can do it if you're willing to put in the hard work, get into the details, don't leave any stone unturned. You can do it.
Absolutely. And what a better way to end off this amazing episode. I thank you so much for saying yes to being a guest and for sharing all of the wisdom and knowledge today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.